Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you may be in the country or the world, and welcome to USDM's continuing series of webinars. A special welcome to our European colleagues. It's late in your business day, and we appreciate your participation. The topic of today's webinar is Common GCP Investigator Site Pitfalls. My name is Robert Lesnevsky. I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Quality Assurance, Regulatory Compliance, and Auditing for USDM, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's session. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Aaliyah Legault, a senior member of our Global QA Regulatory Compliance and Auditing staff. Aaliyah has worked as an investigator for the Food and Drug Administration for 5.5 years. As part of that assignment, she contributed as a member of the International Inspection Cadre at the FDA and is a highly qualified auditor with 13 years of experience in the clinical research industry. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with USDM, I'd like to do a very brief introduction. USDM is focused exclusively on the life sciences domain. We're the market leader in providing IT, quality, and regulatory compliance professional service solutions. We're headquartered in Santa Barbara, California, and we're a compliance partner for many of the best-of-breed vendors, including Oracle, Salesforce, and SAP. We have a proven track record with successful projects with over 300 life science clients, and we're the preferred compliance partner for many small, mid-tier, and large life science companies alike. We have 18 service and solution areas, which are listed on the right-hand side of this slide, and those solution and service areas include ECM, CRM, ERP, global audits, IT and virtualization, cloud compliance, laboratory and LIMS systems, manufacturing systems, PLM, project management, and of course, some of the evolving new regulations, including serialization, track and trace, and UDI. Just a few logistics for today's webinar, and we'll get started. Our webinar is going to be 30 minutes in duration. We want you to get the maximum benefit out of today's webinar, and we would encourage you to enter questions in the chat area during the webinar. They will be addressed immediately following the presentation. The chat area should be on the lower left of your screen. The webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available on our website later this afternoon. So if you or any of your colleagues wish to review it offline, it will be available for you at your convenience. We would also encourage you to discuss this webinar on our social media pages. We're available on Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn, and Twitter, or you can contact us directly at usdm@usdm.com. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Aaliyah at this point.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and welcome everyone. Today's webinar, we will identify areas where principal investigators, PIs, commonly make mistakes during clinical trials. Each pitfall will be highlighted to describe areas often overlooked or underemphasized by PIs at investigative sites. Some of the common investigator site pitfalls we'll review include areas regarding delegation of study-related tasks, training, supervision of the conduct of an ongoing clinical trial, and protocol adherence. We'll then have a summary of our protocol, our topics regarding these pitfalls, and then a Q&A session at the end to answer any questions you may have about the webinar today. What auditors and inspectors look for? I get this question a lot, to be honest. Although the audit or inspection cause may be different, both have similar review approaches and objectives. We're always looking to assure adherence to regulatory requirements, to protect human research subjects, and as well assure the data integrity and study validity. Of course, the monitor also, during their monitoring visits, they're looking to protect human subjects and data integrity as well, so we do share that along with the monitors. Some of the common deficiencies noted during audits and inspections of investigative sites include protocol deviations, inadequate record keeping, and of course this applies to the case histories and the source documents that are maintained at the site. Inadequate oversight of the study personnel, mainly dealing with, of course, PI oversight. Inadequate communication with the IRB. This can include filing and maintaining IRB approval for the current protocol, but also includes the submission of timely reports to the investigational authorities that are overseeing the particular trial for the investigative site. Inadequate accountability of the investigational product. Of course, this can be a study-specific log or just updates that are documented by the site staff within the source documents. Failure to follow the investigational plan and or regulations. Of course, this can also be applicable with protocol deviations or just ensuring that all of the study-specific procedures are completed and documented accordingly. Inadequate subject protections, including informed consent issues. Of course, this can be utilizing the current approved consent. Sometimes it's been utilizing the wrong consent for another study, as well as the informed consent process, ensuring that the complete and adequate informed consent process is conducted with all subjects. Inadequate subject protection as well. This can be failure to report adverse events, AEs, and as well as informed consent issues to the institution overseeing the trial, the IRB, or for this particular study that may be conducted at the investigative site. So these common investigator site pitfalls, of course, they can contribute to those deficiencies noted at audits and inspections. So definitely we'll be reviewing these today to help you and try to ensure that these pitfalls are avoided to avoid, of course, the inspectional and audit findings. For delegation of study-related tasks, of course, the ICS GCP requires that the investigator should maintain a list of appropriately qualified persons to perform to whom the investigator has delegated significant trial-related tasks. Examples of some of the inappropriate delegations include staff without appropriate education, training, and experience delegated to perform study-related trial tasks such as obtaining informed consent. Of course, we want individuals that not only are medically trained to perform this task as well as identify the risks and benefits, to be able to communicate that to the subject. So those subjects definitely seeing where specific personnel who maybe were just involved as a part of doing laboratory personnel were obtaining informed consent. And you want to ensure that they have the appropriate delegation of that and education and training to be able to do that task. Screening evaluations, of course, this can apply to the specific protocol at hand. Every protocol will have different requirements that need to be met as a part of the screening evaluation to determine if the subject is actually eligible to be enrolled in the study. Enrollment criteria and eligibility, of course, this can refer to your inclusion-exclusion criteria. Definitely this should be reviewed prior to enrollment and or randomization into the study. It includes ensuring that all criteria that is met or not met is documented appropriately, and so that you only have subjects that are eligible enrolled in the study. Physical examinations, of course, this is an evaluation that would be performed by a person with an MD or DO most often. Sometimes sponsors do permit the exceptions for this where some sub-investigators, maybe a nurse practitioner or physician assistant, to conduct physical examinations that are then, of course, overseen by the PI. But, of course, these can be study-specific, but most often these should be conducted by a person with an MD or DO. Evaluation of adverse events for causality and severity. Again, this is another area of seeing inappropriate delegations by, say, a study coordinator providing evaluations of adverse events when these should definitely be done by a person that's medically trained with an MD or DO degree to confirm the causality and severity, especially in relation to the investigational product. Assessments of primary study endpoints. Again, another study-specific item specific to the protocol as far as what are their primary study endpoints, what are they looking for as far as the objectives, primary and secondary, within this particular clinical investigation. And training of other site staff. Of course, as the PI is responsible for ensuring that all site staff are knowledgeable and aware of their duties and responsibilities and the protocol, I've definitely have seen delegations where other site staff have performed these types of activities, but they didn't have the appropriate training or experience themselves to conduct this activity during the trial. Appropriate delegation, we want to see that the investigator ensures that individuals who perform a task, that they're delegated and they have the qualified education, training, and experience to perform that task. Appropriate delegation, of course, includes tasks considered to be clinical and medical. And again, that medical professional should have not only the appropriate medical degree, again, usually the MD or DO when doing things like the physical exams, adverse events, assessments, of course, appropriate certifications and licensures where applicable as well. The list of delegated staff should identify the dates of involvement of the study. And this should correlate with the training documentation as well to assure that the site staff that are delegated responsibility had the appropriate training during their involvement in the study to ensure that all site staff performing study-specific procedures are identified on the delegation log. And this just provides a conclusive list of all site staff that would be working on the study, not only have the training, but also that you would expect to see signatures within the source documents or initials for completion of those study-specific tasks. The delegation log is definitely utilized during audits to confirm the signatures or the personnel that we see performing tasks are actually delegated those responsibilities. I've definitely, one of my most recent experience I've had where there were a number of site staff listed throughout the source documents that were performing a variety of study-specific procedures, but did not have those specific tasks, and most often they may have identified as administrative codes or responsibilities on the delegation log. They had none of those identified tasks on the delegation log, and it definitely was a concern to me, especially regarding training, to ensure that they met the training requirements to even perform those tasks. So definitely something that I would look for. Training. ICS GCP also requires the investigator to ensure that all persons assisting with the trial, that they're adequately informed about the protocol, the investigational product, and their trial-related duties and functions. Examples of inadequate training practices include failure to provide and document protocol training prior to performance of study-specific procedures. Again, this is an example of where I would utilize the delegation log as well. I look for time periods where personnel should be responsible for working on a specific study. I then tie that to training to ensure that they have training that coincides with the dates on the delegation log, and then I look to, in the source document, to confirm when they actually conducted study-specific procedures. That's just one way that auditors or inspectors will commonly do a cross-reference to ensure that site staff have the adequate training prior to performance of study-specific procedures. For lack of training, documentation regarding protocol amendments and revisions. This can be a problem for an ongoing clinical investigation that has had a number of amendments and revisions. When those amendments or revisions are disseminated to the investigator, and then that investigator obtains IRB approval or ethics committee approval for their specific site, the training should then be provided to the actual staff who will be assisting in the study. And this can be a variety of ways. This can be as a part of update meetings. This can be a formal training session. It could be some sort of self-review of updated amendments and respective documents. But along with this, there should always be documentation for any type of retraining, updated trainings that will be done to ensure that all site staff are familiar and aware of their responsibilities. Failure to document training for new site staff after trial initiation. Of course, normally in the course of a clinical investigation, there is an initiation visit. And during this visit, the monitor or another sponsor representative will provide training to all site staff present. Of course, after that, there may be new site staff brought on board, maybe due to turnover at the site. You definitely want to ensure that those new site staff members after trial initiation, or maybe who just weren't present at the initiation visit, that they also have training and document that accordingly. Training documentation that does not indicate the protocol version and or include or identify the training resources utilized. So often I see protocol training and documentation, and this can be for, say, amendments. When you have a number of amendments and revisions throughout the conduct of the study, and you notice that there's no documentation of the protocol version. So how do you correlate the protocol version that was utilized to train that particular site staff? I've gotten some pushback from sites on this, and where they've justified, where you can look at the date of the training and kind of determine what protocol version was currently in use at the site. Well, you have to, look at it a little deeper than that. Protocol versions or revisions often are not disseminated to the site on their date. So you may have a date of, say, November 2014, but it may not actually make it out to the site from the sponsor to, say, February of the following year. So how do you address that in terms of protocol revisions? You want to make sure that the actual protocol version that is utilized for training is actually documented. And it's just a part of complete and accurate documentation for your protocol training. It's not to really make things more difficult or to add an additional requirement, but you always want to ensure, as until the actual protocol amendment or version is in place and has IRB approved at your site and is actually being utilized, that protocol training would occur at that point and not until then. Training of site staff by the individual not delegated that responsibility. As the PI is the person who's ultimately responsible for training the site staff, definitely want to make sure that if other site staff are performing training or updates or overseeing other site staff, there should be documentation of that, just as any other delegation of responsibility you want to see. I don't want to see a lab tech training the study coordinator about how to conduct blood pressures and overview wound care and other study-specific procedure. The person training should have, again, that education, that responsibility, and that experience to be conducting that task. Site training objectives that we definitely want to see at sites is that site staff are familiar with the purpose of the study. Believe it or not, this actually helps site staff understand, why they're doing what they're doing. It brings the importance home to them to ensure that they're always taking care to do every required study procedure. Understanding of specific details of the protocol and attributes of the investigational product needed to perform their assigned tasks. Again, it's just about making sure that the site staff are aware of their responsibilities and duties to ensure that all protocol-specific requirements are conducted at the specific time frame and as required by the respective visit. Aware of regulatory requirements and acceptable standards of the conduct of clinical trials and protection of human subjects. This is where training with good clinical practice and human subject protections comes into play. Although it's not always a requirement, I've seen for some sponsors to require this type of documentation at sites or to have been conducted by sites. All site staff should be aware of GCP guidelines as well as protection of human subjects. This can be conducted not only at the SID. Most often now I'm seeing that this is covered by the monitor or sponsor representative. It can be conducted at the investigator meeting for the initiation of a trial. It can be conducted by the PI as a part of their training or their institutional requirements. Additionally, there are outside vendors that a lot of investigative sites I've seen contract with or work with to provide GCP or human subjects training to the site staff. However it's done, again, it ensures that the site staff are familiar with all of the regulatory requirements and their acceptable standards, including source documentation standards during the conduct of the trial. Site staff should be competent to perform or have been trained to perform tasks delegated. Again, you just want to make sure that not only that they have that education experience, but that you train them on anything that is study specific that they're delegated to do. I've definitely seen times where I have a person who's had an updated responsibility. So although the delegation law was updated to include that responsibility, the training that they received was not updated to include that new responsibility. So definitely always making sure that the tasks on the delegation log coincide with the training that's provided. Informed of any pertinent changes during the conduct of the trial and receive appropriate additional training as appropriate. This can come into play, again, not only for any type of updates as a part of the trial or changes as required for the trial, but think about it in terms of issues with performance identified. And this can not only be identified during a monitoring visit, but overall review of PI oversight. When you're identifying that things are not being done or things are being reported to you in monitoring follow-up letters, even feedback from other site staff, say sub-investigators, that someone is not performing to their standard or to their delegated task. You definitely want to make sure that additional training is conducted and documented according to that. Supervision of the conduct of an ongoing clinical trial. So here we've identified the CFR components that apply. So for drugs and biologics, a commitment by the investigator that he or she will personally conduct or supervise the described investigations as a part of 21 CFR Part 312. And for the medical devices, our 21 CFR Part 812, the statement of the investigator's commitment to supervise all testing of the device involving human subjects. ICS GCP also requires the investigator should ensure they have sufficient time to properly conduct and complete the trial within the agreed trial period. Some examples of inadequate investigator oversight include where study drug administered to subjects was not under the investigator's supervision. So this could be a subject or patient at the site that received a study drug but was not actually enrolled in the study. An investigational device used for subjects not under supervision of an authorized investigator. Again, this can be the same instance where a patient at the site or the clinic is permitted to receive treatment with an investigational device, although they were not actually enrolled in the study. Lack of evaluation of a sub-investigator, a study coordinator performance. I've definitely seen this as a PI oversight critical issue observed where sub-I and a study coordinator were primarily doing the entire trial on their own. There was no documentation of oversight from the PI. And you have to look at it from the standpoint of an audit and an inspection. Auditors and inspectors come in and they're reviewing documents, so they're not there on site during day-to-day study procedures, conduct of the trial to actually see is the PI present, what is his involvement, how is he overseeing them. Everything is about the documentation. So if the PI's signature is never present in the source documents, The evaluations by the sub-I are never co-signed by the PI. There are no documentations of meetings that are being held by the site staff to ensure that they are communicating, that the PI is aware. How can an auditor or an inspector confirm PI oversight? And those are just some of the questions you have to ask yourself in terms of your site or where you work or where you're involved, even as a monitor. How can you confirm PI oversight is actually being done there? Core oversight of satellite sites. Again, this applies to when there are multiple satellite sites involved that the PI has to oversee. What type of oversight is being done by the PI? Does he make weekly, monthly visits? Do they hold calls to discuss the conduct of the trial? Are staff being overseen at that particular satellite site? What connection do they have with the PI? Do they ever see the PI? You know, those are definitely some of the questions you may want to ask, and just to ensure that all the satellite sites are definitely being overseen by the PI at all times. Failure to review and determine enrollment eligibility criteria. This can commonly be a checklist of inclusion-exclusion criteria, a statement towards the end of inclusion-exclusion criteria, eligibility criteria to document if the subject actually meets the criteria to enter. Commonly, some deviations from this I've seen where a study coordinator is the only person making the determination if a subject is eligible. And definitely you want the PI oversight involved in that. If he or she is ultimately the person that is responsible for ensuring that all subjects enrolled in the study actually meet the criteria. So there should be documentation of that. Failure to conduct the informed consent process of all enrolled subjects. Again, the informed consent is a process, and there are elements that should be conducted as a part of that and reviewed with all subjects. But of course, to ensure that this was actually done, there should be documentation of the informed consent process to ensure that all components were actually completed during this process. Adequate investigator supervision may look like a plan for supervision. So a plan for supervision and oversight could be an SOP. It could be periodic meetings with the site staff. And of course, there would be meeting minutes or some sort of documentation to confirm what was reviewed as a part of these meetings. You want to ensure that there's sufficient time to properly conduct and supervise the trial. Definitely a question that can be asked or posed is, how many trials does the PI have to oversee? Does he or she permit himself or herself time enough to oversee all the number of trials that actually, are ongoing? What is the commitment? Truly complex trials may require more time than a couple of simple trials. So all of that should take into play the complexity of the trial, the number of site staff, the satellite sites. All of these different things play an important role. Dedicate appropriate supervision based upon factors like staff qualifications, nature of the trial, subject population, and third parties involved. Again, there could be an SMO involved. And although some responsibilities may be transferred to that SMO, you definitely want to ensure that there is PI oversight over that, and PI, again, is ultimately ensure sufficient qualifications of individuals to which tasks are delegated. Again, this is a part of the CVs or curriculum vitae that you collect and file for respective site staff. Even for those that are not listed on the FDA 1572, sometimes it's a good practice to have curriculum vitae for those site staff. It ensures that they have the education and the experience to be delegated specific tasks that they're assigned as a trial. Confirm a thorough understanding of the study and sufficient training to the study staff. Again, just ensuring that they're aware of their responsibilities and have documented training to conduct those delegated responsibilities. Presence and documentation of investigator oversight involvement in the ongoing conduct of the study. I can't tell you enough how important it becomes to actually see PI involvement within the source document. Again, as auditors and inspectors only come in at a certain point to review, we definitely want to ensure that there is documentation to confirm that the PI is actually involved in overseeing the trial. Protocol adherence. Of course, general responsibilities of the investigator include ensuring that the investigation is conducted according to the signed investigative agreement, investigational plan, or applicable regulations. ICH GCP requires a trial should be conducted in compliance with the protocol that has received prior institutional review board or independent ethics committee approval or favorable opinion. So failure to follow the protocol, of course, can result in the enrollment of ineligible subjects. Of course, protocols have specific inclusion and exclusion criteria that should be followed to ensure that you do enroll the subjects that are intended for the trial. Violation of protecting protocol affecting safety. Of course, if you enroll subjects that may not meet the specific criteria that's designed for the study, they could be placed at harm. There could be a number of other risks that are associated with health, potential impacts, and definitely these have to be evaluated in case there are examples where you fail to follow the protocol. A large number of protocol deviations. Some protocol deviations are, minor. This is one reason that a lot of deviations are categorized as critical, major. A large number of outer window visits. Visits may indicate a visit window limitation that could be discussed with the sponsor. Poor planning by the site on their times in terms of scheduling staff or scheduling subjects, maybe scheduling too many subjects at once. And then failure to adhere to the protocol can expose subjects to unreasonable risk, which is definitely what we're all aiming to avoid. We do not want subjects to be enrolled that will cause them any additional risks or harm. Review of protocol deviations for trends. This is definitely a site practice I recommend. As you want to address opportunities, again, for site staff retraining. Maybe there's some things that the site staff are not familiar with, that they're unsure of, or they're just not understanding the protocol requirements. Identify issues with the delegation of responsibility. Ensure that everyone, again, that they have the competence, the education, the training, and experience to actually be conducting the tasks they're actually delegated. Evaluation of minor versus major protocol deviations. Again, I've had a lot of sites kind of identify, well, a lot of these protocol deviations are minor, or these are just minor things where we didn't do. But you have to keep into account a large number of minor deviations can actually be a major finding. Use of deviations to develop corrective actions to prevent future occurrence. This is definitely a great practice as you want to learn from your mistakes. Adequate protocol adherence, again, you should provide protection for the rights, safety, and welfare of subjects. Performance of all safety assessments intended to detect drug toxicity, and enrollment of subjects intended for the trial. Again, this is the reason that the protocols have inclusion and exclusion criteria specifically designed for the study. We want to train all study personnel involved in determining eligibility to ensure that they understand the inclusion and exclusion criteria to avoid deviations, which can potentially be major, even critical violations. It does not rely on exemptions or waivers from the sponsor. You don't want to enroll subjects who were not meant to be enrolled in the study and then have to rely on a sponsor exemption or waiver to permit them to remain in the study. That's definitely not a good practice, and you shouldn't rely on that for your enrollment. In summary, the common investigator pitfalls should be monitored throughout the clinical trial to ensure immediate action to address concerns noted. Again, this can be during monitoring visits. This can be during your own quality assurance or quality control processes at your site. Avoid common investigator pitfalls by implementing and maintaining adequate quality assurance and quality control systems. of course, by designing protocols at the site, procedures, systems, whatever you can put in place at your specific site to ensure that everyone is aware of their specific duties, as well a quality of standard as which they should perform, and then having those systems in place that can check those systems to confirm if they're actually working as designed. Ensure there's adequate corrective action plan developed and implemented upon the identification of any observations during the site quality assurance processes, monitoring visits, audits, and inspections. Definitely you always want to look at things from an upper level at how you can improve. Okay, these things have been identified. What do I do now to address them? How can I improve? How can I continue to advance and make a better outcome? You know, do the best that you can during any clinical investigation. Definitely feedback from the auditors or monitors can help with this. And ensuring that you have the process in place for development of corrective action plan is also a good advantage. Resources. So throughout this presentation, we've identified the CFR and ICH guidelines. Definitely great resources. Please don't forget that there are a number of FDA guidances available online that can identify great tools and resources for you to utilize and refer to during the conduct of a clinical trial. Additionally, online resources are a great tool that I recommend, as it gives you the capability to actually do a search online for specific topics. Instead of having a document that's 50 pages long and you have to thumb through and tab it, definitely online resources permit you the availability to do a search and find things a lot quicker and reference them. Ensuring that the site staff are aware of where these references are filed, not only at the site or available online. Definitely a great practice. At this point, I will conclude my presentation, but we are still available for questions, and I'll pass this over to Bob.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Aaliyah, for a very, very informative presentation. We do have a few questions from the audience in the chat section. And for those of you who haven't entered any questions, please feel free to do so using the chat box. So the first question, Aaliyah, is there any checklist for GCP audits, and do you provide GCP audit contract services?
Yes, I have observed a number of checklists for GCP audits that can be utilized and provided. I've definitely seen some free searchable online. Internet is a great resource, and I use it myself. I do provide GCP audit contract services, and I have done this for the past, it's been 4 years now since I've left FDA and been doing independent audits. So I do provide it. I do mock audits to not only prepare sites before they have a potential regulatory audit, but not only just to keep them audit ready at all times. I definitely believe sites should be ready. Don't wait until you get notification of an audit to prepare yourself and try to go through a checklist. I would include, say, the GCP checklist as a part of your normal quality assurance process, just to ensure that you're staying on top of documents, that you're aware of your requirements, and you're not waiting to the last minute to try and prepare for an audit.
Great. Okay, a couple of other questions, Aaliyah. The next question is from Karen. It's actually a two-part question. And she says, you mentioned several examples of appropriate and inappropriate delegations. So she asks, does FDA require the investigator to complete an FDA 1572 for conducting clinical investigations of a medical device? And then the second part of that question is, do the sites need to file CVs for all people listed on the delegation log, or just those on the FDA 1572?
Great question. So for medical devices, this FDA 1572 is not required. An investigator agreement is what's required for medical devices. And basically, it's not a specific form, but it's pretty much very similar. It's that agreement of the PI to conduct the trial according to the regulations. And it's regarding the CVs. FDA actually requires the CV for the investigator, which is your PI, to be filed and saved. The GCP requirements, ICH GCP requires both the PI and the sub-investigator CVs to be saved and filed, not only as a part of the investigator site file, but as well as a part of the sponsor TMF.
Okay, a couple of other questions, Aaliyah. There's a question from Linda who asks, do the regulations require CVs to be updated every 2 years, or is this sponsor specific?
FDA does not actually require an update for the actual CVs to be done. The initial submission of documentation of training and experience on the CV is adequate. Usually the requirement for an update every 2 years is sponsor specific, but definitely you want to adhere to any sponsor requirements that are provided during the conduct of the trial.
Okay, we have one other question. We'll get to that in a minute. If there's any other questions from anyone in the audience, please post them to the chat area while we're covering this last question. So the last question, Aaliyah, that we have posted is from Greg, and he asks, do staff members who perform standard of care tasks, such as vitals, need protocol-specific training?
I would say the answer to that would be yes. If they're conducting those vitals, that essential process is a part of a protocol-specific procedure, yes, because there could be protocol-specific requirements. Commonly sites, clinics, hospitals, they have a standard of care practice for performing vital signs. Protocols also have a specific requirement at times when performing vital signs, such as the subject may need to be seated for 10 minutes at rest, utilizing a non-dominant arm, capturing the vital signs in duplicate with 2 minutes between them. That's not a standard of care. So depending upon the protocol, depending upon the study-specific requirement, yes, I definitely would expect them to not only be listed on the delegation log, but have study-specific training documentation to correlate.
Okay, that's great. So at this point, Aaliyah, we have no further questions posted. So thank you, everyone, very much for attending today. As we mentioned earlier, certainly in terms of follow-up resources, please ask questions, share your ideas, connect with us via our various social media at USDM Life Sciences. You can contact us directly at USDM.com or via email at USDM@USDM.com. There were a couple of questions regarding contact with Aaliyah. Certainly, if anyone has an interest in follow-up in terms of one-on-one discussions, in terms of perhaps any audit support services or any other services that Aaliyah may be able to provide, please reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy to schedule a follow-up call to discuss that with you. So, again, thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and I hope everyone has a great day. This webinar, as we mentioned, was pre-recorded and will be available later today. We have many other webinars out there on our website as well on related topics, as well as topics covering our other 18 practice solution and service areas. So please feel free to avail yourself of those. They're all complimentary, and there's a lot of great information out there and resources out there that you can take advantage of. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great day today.